Yes, superhero films. It seems that every once a year, each new superhero film is released, whether it's based on a comic book or graphic novel, or even if it's just an original one, there will always be a superhero film. And I love it. And I really love it, guys, I swear. But as you all know, the most popular superhero films right now are both from Marvel and DC, with their respective cinematic universes. There's Marvel with their Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU for short, and DC with their DCEU, or the Worlds of DC, or I don't know what the hell you want to call it. It's simply because they didn't decide what their universe will be called. So I don't know. Any suggestions? Yeah, I think so. But besides those, what about those superhero films that never got released by both Marvel and DC? Well, you may be surprised to know, but there are some that didn't get released. Like literally, there are some, not all, some. Oh my candy, there are a lot. But this video is mostly gonna be about Marvel. Why? Because I freaking love Marvel. But don't worry for all you DC fans. If I could have the time, I'll make one about DC because they also have a bunch of cancelled films. And so, without further ado, shall we begin? So, let's start with the basics first. So, before the MCU even began, Marvel was actually on the verge of bankruptcy. So, what did they do? Well, they decided to sold the rights to each character to big name studios. We got Sony who got their hands on Spider-Man, Fox who got their hands on both the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but considering the fact that Disney bought Fox, now it seems that we might get the X-Men and Fantastic Four in the MCU. And Universal, who got their hands on, of course, Hulk, which is probably the reason why we won't get another Hulk solo film in the MCU after the Incredible Hulk. But anyways, what would have happened if Marvel hadn't sold the rights to Spider-Man to Sony? While we would have had Spider-Man existing in the MCU, we also would have had a completely different studio making a Spider-Man film. And that's the example of Canon Films' Spider-Man, which would have been some sort of horror type film rather than a superhero film. The film, which would have been directed by Poltergeist's own Toby Hooper, would have featured a story in which Peter Parker, after an experiment, transforms him into a giant, eight-armed, suicidal, and hairy spider. Which, Jesus, what were they thinking? Now, why was this conceived? Well, to simply put, the canon chiefs Menahem Golden and his cousin Yoras Goldblist misunderstood the concept of Spider-Man and thought it was like the Wolfman, which is just what? Why? Luckily though, Marvel veteran himself, Stanley, God bless you, noticed that this was an insult to his creation and made a better story in which we were seeing Otto Octavius being a teacher and also a mentor to a college-age Peter Parker, which is exactly like the plot for Spider-Man 2, ain't it? Am I right? Am I right? Anyways, however, after an accident involving the cyclotron, which is the plot device that's going to be used for this film before, Parker and Octavius become both Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus respectively. Octavius would have tried to bring back the cyclotron, while Spider-Man attempts to stop this plan, which sounds a lot better than the original because Jesus Christ, that was so bad. However, because of Canada's shorted financial crisis, they shut down the project after spending about $1.5 million on the project, which I think it's fair. Speaking of Spider-Man, what would have happened if there was an R-rated Spider-Man film? Well, your question may be answered if Titanic and Avatar director himself, James Cameron's Spider-Man, had been released. The film would have starred Leonardo DiCaprio as the titular character. Yes, that Leonardo DiCaprio, the one that never won an Oscar. Yeah, that guy. And the film would have had a lot of graphic violence, profanity, which is just a fancy way of saying swearing or curse words, but whatever. And a scene in which, after revealing his identity to Mary Jane Watson, both Parker and Watson would have had sex on a Brooklyn Bridge. Yep, that's exactly what would have happened if this was a thing. I'm not kidding. That's really what happened. Look it up. But the film was cancelled because of the Marvel bankruptcy stuff that I mentioned before. Where they sold the rights to the characters to their respective studios. Yeah, that one. So that's why it got shut down. And I don't know if it's gonna be good or not. I don't know. But we do got other R-rated movies like Deadpool, Logan, so it would have been alright. Now, we all know that the Fantastic Four films never really reached critical acclaim from both critics and audiences. I mean, just look at the Rotten Tomato scores for each film. But since Disney had bought Fox, it means that we might get a good Fantastic Four film. But before, there was a time in which we would have gotten a good Fantastic Four film, set to be directed by Peyton Reed, who would go on to direct both Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp, and would have been set in the 60s and would ignore the origin story, which kind of sounds interesting, and I might watch that. But sadly, it never happened because apparently Fox didn't like Reed's ideas and decided to have another director, which is Tim Story, to direct it, and well, we all know how that turned out, so yeah. With the X-Men coming to the MCU, we do have to wonder what would have happened if we didn't get to see Professor X and his gifted students. That being, of course, the X-Men, if you didn't know. Well, back in 2014, while announcing all the films of Phase 3, Kevin Feige, president of Marvel Studios, showed one film that I don't think we'll ever see in the light of day. I probably never will. And that film is Inhumans. The film would have had a 2019 release and would have ended Marvel's Phase 3 before, of course, Far From Home came along and took that spot. But unfortunately, I don't think that would ever happen because both Feige and former Disney CEO Ike Perlmutter had a sort of disagreement, which resulted in a cancellation of the Inhumans movie. Ever since then, Feige decided to focus on one film in Phase 3 though, and that film would end up being Captain Marvel. And oh yeah, let's not talk about that Inhumans TV show. Just know, speaking of the X-Men, after both the financial and critical disaster of XMen Origins Wolverine, it seems that there won't be another XMen Origins film. But what would have happened if Origins Wolverine never bombed? Oh yeah, I forgot. If you technically forgot what Origins Wolverine is, then guess what? I reminded you. So sorry to interrupt, but if you're hearing anything like a white buzzing noise, I'm technically sorry. It's just my microphone is like a bit glitchy, so you're gonna have to listen to it to the whole thing. So, anyways, back to what I was talking about. Yeah. Well, if that actually never, if Origins Wolverine never bombed, then we would have gotten an X-Men Origins Magneto film, which would have been directed by David S. Goyer, a man who you may forgot directed Blade Trinity, but he did write for the Dark Knight trilogy, so that's one. Anyways, the film would focus on both Professor X and Magneto, who would have been friends in the beginning, but ultimately become enemies after Magneto is killing Nazis' revenge. And as who will be portraying the two? Well, Ian McKellen is set to portray Magneto in his solo film, and I think Patrick Stewart was gonna be there, but I don't know. But anyways, we do know why this film was cancelled, not because of the story or anything, but what happened with Origins Wolverine, as I mentioned before. So you kind of see why we never got to see it. So, anyways, back to the MCU. 2008's Iron Man was quite a huge hit, and of course, the starting point for what has become the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU for short, if you want to call that. But there was actually a time in which we would have actually gotten an Iron Man film in the early 2000s, which would have been directed by Quentin Tarantino. Yes, that Quentin Tarantino. And would have actually starred Tom Cruise as the Iron Avenger, which, can you imagine that? Boy, who would have actually would have, like, I don't know, changed the production, like, hey, make me the star instead, not, I don't want to be covered my face covered, which would have been a huge disaster. But eventually, both Cruise and Tarantino lost interest in the film, and of course, the film was eventually scrapped. Before Doctor Strange appeared in the MCU, legendary film director Guillermo del Toro, who you may recognize from directing Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, Crimson Peak, and Pacific Rim, was going to direct a Doctor Strange film, which would have been an epic and quite awesome film, mostly because Del Toro is an excellent director. Not just that, a director of fantasy, mystical, magic, wizardy stuff, and he could actually make it good. But of course, sadly, this film was scrapped because the Thor dropped out to direct, of course, The Hobbit. But he also dropped out of that project as well, so why bother directing another one if you're just gonna drop that out? Like, come on. While most superhero films are basically about the main good guy, why won't there be any films about the main villains? Well, technically, there was one back in 2016. Some of you might have forgotten. It's called Suicide Squad, and it's not really that good. But Suicide Squad did mark the first ever comic book film to have the bad guys as the main characters. But what if Sony had done that first? Well, the result was a Sinister Six film, which would have been released around 3 years ago if we didn't know that was gonna be around 2016. But unfortunately, that film got cancelled after Marvel made a deal with Sony for Spider-Man to appear in the MCU. Which, if it actually happened, while it would have been first, would have just been like the Amazing Spider-Man. So, yeah, a bit good, but not that amazing. And so that wraps the entire video of cancelled Marvel movies. And as I said in the video, as for all you DC fans want to see a video about this, don't worry. If I have time, I'll make one. And also for the record, these aren't the only cancelled films. There are some more like some a Spider-Man 4 or two Amazing Spider-Man sequels and many more. But these are the ones that I'm most interested about. So I'll probably make a part 2 after I make a video about canceled DC movies as well. But for the meantime, those were the movies that canceled Marvel movies that I found interested in. So if you want to see more of this, make sure to like and subscribe. And also, if you can, give your own thoughts about what movie would you want to see, what Marvel movie would you want to see, and not being canceled. So, anyways, that's it. I hope I see you guys next time, and peace out.